A lot of people very zealous and interested in the Deshaun Watson case. Big picture, nothing's really been going on because Monday, July 11 is the day on which the two sides will submit their documents to Judge Sue L. Robinson so that she can then make a decision on whether and to what extent Deshaun Watson should be disciplined. Now, maybe there'll be some settlement talks after the paperwork is submitted. As someone said to me yesterday, you can't expect settlement to happen while the lawyers are billing their hours on the briefs that are being submitted on Monday. And that's a good point. After the dust settles, after the meter is off, when it comes to putting together 20 or 30 pages, sometimes there's a page limit that's applied. Even if there isn't a page limit, you don't want to send in a 90-page brief. You want it to be something the judge can digest fairly quickly and easily. But once that happens, in theory, the two sides could try to work something out. I continue to believe that the league can't work anything out with Deshaun Watson until Judge Robinson issues a decision. They need someone else to say there isn't nearly as much here, NFL, as you thought. And that takes me to the first interesting point of the day. Josina Anderson of CBS reported yesterday that as to one of the 12, remember the NFL, of the 24 lawsuits and at least 2 other claimants that were out there, the NFL talked to 12 people. And then the NFL whittled 12 down to 5 for the purposes of last week's hearing. Josina Anderson reported that as to one of the 12 that didn't become one of the 5, there was an interview of the woman's adult son, and the son said that the woman was very complimentary of Deshaun Watson until allegations started to surface, and then it pivoted. And the impression that was created by the reporting from Josina Anderson was basically, this is a money grab. It wasn't reported that way, but that's the inescapable conclusion that you come to when you look at what she reported. This is the one case that you can point to and say, aha, this isn't about justice. This isn't about truth. This isn't about right or wrong. It's about dollars and cents. The woman in question was fine until she found out there was a gravy train to potentially climb aboard. Now, got an email in the middle of the night from Tony Busby. And I always need to be careful about identifying unnamed sources and people who talk off the record. And I will just say this, I had no communication at all with Tony Busby other than this email that came to me out of the blue overnight. We may have communicated at some point so far long ago and on something that was so trivial that I don't even remember it, very limited. I don't want to completely make a blanket statement. There's never been anything, but there's nothing that I remember, nothing that I look to and say, boy, that was a big deal. That was a big piece of this broader puzzle that's played out over the last 15 months. But in response to what we wrote last night regarding the Josina Anderson report, Busby, and you can find the post at PFT if you want to see the full details and see the exact quote, Busby basically said, this isn't one of my clients. I don't represent anybody who had an adult son that was interviewed by the NFL. And when you read between the lines, and you don't have to look very far, you get the impression that Busby actually vetted this person's claim and turned it down. And he's claimed all along he's vetted these cases before filing suit. So as to this specific person, I get the impression, very clear impression from reading the quote that he sent to us that we published earlier today, that he did look into it and he decided not to offer representation to this person. Maybe in the process of looking into her claim, he realized that something didn't add up, or he just got a sense from talking to her. And people who practice law for an extended period of time develop a very keen sense of who is and isn't full of crap. Now, sometimes you get bamboozled. Sometimes there are very good liars, very convincing liars. Sometimes there are people who can't convince you when you're telling or when they're telling you the truth. But after you do it 20, 25, 30 years, and you deal with a lot of different people, you begin to develop a sense of who is and who isn't straight with you. And I don't know why he decided not to represent this person, but according to Busby, he doesn't represent anyone who has an adult son who was interviewed by the NFL. And he knows that of the 12 cases that the NFL focused on before cutting it to 5, there's 24 at least, 26 if you throw in at least 2 who made criminal complaints that didn't sue. The NFL cut it to 12. Don't know why they focused on the 12 when there's 26. Don't know why they went to 5 from the 12. But one of the 12 was this person that Josina Anderson reported about on Thursday. And Busby said, I represent 10 of the 12 that the NFL focused on. So there's 2 that weren't represented by Tony Busby. And apparently this one case that the NFL threw overboard as it was trimming the fat down to 5, this one case has a potentially fatal flaw if we are characterizing properly what was reported by Josina Anderson. So that's important because I think some people were looking at that report as evidence of that first domino. You just hit the first domino and they all start falling and the cases fall apart. And we finally have our evidence of a grand conspiracy that was held together by Tony Busby. All of these claims are meritless to the point of frivolous, but Tony Busby, the Pied Piper of Houston, holds them together for 15 months and manages to not have anyone break ranks, to not have anyone send a text message. When are we going to get our money? Hey, I thought we were settling this case in October when they were going to trade him with the Dolphins. I want my money, $100,000. I want my $100,000. What the hell's going on? I mean, you would assume that a diligent effort to represent the total interest of Deshaun Watson would come across evidence like that if it existed. And again, for the people who aren't accustomed to how things work in the legal system, they tend to create the footprints, digitally or otherwise, that a good lawyer can then work backward and find. So I look at this and I say, damn, if this is all they got, because I got the distinct impression last week that the Deshaun Watson media assault would begin this week. And I've said all along, Rusty Hardin, the lawyer who represents Deshaun Watson, if you've got a silver bullet, let's see it. Show it to us. Help us understand how you can make that Jenga tower of 24 plus claims collapse onto itself. Show us. If you've got evidence that this is all something that was orchestrated simply by the lawyer, remember, Hardin's associate or partner, I assume it's partner, Leah Graham, if I'm recalling the name correctly. It's been a while and a lot's gone on. The comments made to Soledad O'Brien of Real Sports. How do you say we should believe Deshaun Watson over the 24 people who have sued him? And the explanation was, and I'm paraphrasing here, basically, it's the lawyer. It's always the lawyer. The lawyers are always the evil ones. They're the ones who are orchestrating everything, and they're the ones who are trying to make malice and injustice so he can get on TV and expand his social media following. Look, baloney is what I said to that at the time, and I say baloney to that now. But my point is, Thursday's report from Josina Anderson was giving to people who would like to say, hey, look, this really is Tony Busby holding together a house of cards, and now the house of cards is collapsing. If he didn't represent the person, kind of hard to make the argument, folks, that that's what's going on. And I wonder whether, now look, again, the NFL didn't pick that case as one of the 12 that became one of the 5. It sounds like they vetted that claim the same way Tony Busby did. And Busby decided not to represent the individual, and the NFL decided not to make that person's claims one of the 5 that were submitted to Judge Robinson for consideration. So that's where that stands. And again, I'll go back to my default position on this, and I'll say publicly here to Rusty Hardin, to David Mulugeta, to anyone representing the interests of Deshaun Watson, anyone from the Cleveland Browns that would like to get his side of it out there. If you have something that shows that these are all bogus claims, if you have something that proves that these claims will fail in civil court, give it to us. There's no court order protecting any of the testimony that has been given in depositions. I'm not going to read all the transcripts trying to find your silver bullet for you. No one has time to sift through the haystacks in search of a needle that may or may not be there. You know if the needle's there. Show it to us. Show it to us. Somebody will report it. I mean, look, Josina Anderson reported the thing about the person who isn't represented by Tony Busby. Surely, if there is some smoking gun out there that shows that one of the individuals represented by Busby is full of crap, that would be significant. Now, 20 of the cases have been settled, presumably for more than the $100,000 that Deshaun Watson was willing to pay in October, because circumstances changed in a negative way for Deshaun Watson since then. But there's 4 left who have sued. Let's see what happens. If you have something, let's see it. I've been saying that for weeks now. If you've got something that blows these civil cases out of the water, let's see it. Busby also added this in the email that he sent to me overnight. And this relates to the reporting that we and others have done as to the absence of evidence of violence, threats of violence, coercion, et cetera, the kind of thing that would become the more traditional assault and would trigger a 6-game baseline suspension under the personal conduct policy. This is the quote from Busby. It was recently reported that none of the 5 cases presented by the NFL involved violence, coercion, or force. I'm not sure how that's a surprise. Only 2 of the civil cases we filed alleged that type of conduct. The women who made those allegations have settled with Watson. Neither spoke to the NFL. The majority of the civil cases we filed instead alleged indecent exposure and assault, that is, touching without consent. We aren't at this time privy to what was presented to the NFL, but we expect we will know soon enough. In any event, as I've said several times, what the NFL does or fails to do has no bearing on those civil cases that remain against Watson or the additional cases we are preparing to file against the Texans. So that speaks to the fact that we've got 2 different standards here. And we've really had 3. The criminal stuff's over unless and until someone else files a criminal complaint beyond the ones that didn't result in an indictment. And we all know proof beyond a reasonable doubt, highest standard out there. That's not relevant for now. We've got 2 other standards. We've got the civil standard of assault, and it doesn't take much to create a technical assault under the law. One of the first things we learned in law school in torts class, intentional torts, assault, battery, invasion of privacy, trespass, things that are deliberately done to someone, things that involve a desire to punch, hit, whatever. It doesn't take much to create liability. The question is, what are the damages? And it's entirely possible that these individuals will prove that there was technically an assault. And then the question becomes, what's the compensation for the assault? That's different from the NFL standard. The NFL standard is, did he violate the personal conduct policy? And the way that assault is used in the personal conduct policy, it suggests a higher level of misconduct. Now, that's where this is going to be challenging. What will Judge Robinson find as it relates to the actual facts of the case? And she's the one who's in a position to determine who's credible and who isn't. We don't know who all testified before her, but I'm assuming at some point Deshaun Watson told his story. Does she believe he's telling the truth? Does she see holes in his story? Does she see holes in the claims that were being made against him? But at some point, she has to find what happened. That's what's going to be so critical in her written opinion that hopefully we'll see. And I assume we'll see it because it doesn't involve an owner. We always see it when it involves a player. I'm assuming we'll see it and we'll be able to see the factual findings that she makes. What does she believe happened? So, from Busby's perspective, and this is along the lines of, and I don't want to be too graphic with this, but we've all seen the allegations. He made his penis touch someone's hand, right? There was never any allegation of like grabbing someone and forcing them to do something, holding them down and assaulting them that way. It's a more subtle assault. Does that rise to the level of a violation of the personal conduct policy? That's all to be determined. So I guess what Busby's saying is, hey, we never said that there was the kind of violent exchange, that it's more about the circumstances. It was more of a subtle effort by a guy who was getting a massage, and there's a certain amount of consent that is involved by the person providing the massage. You're going to have certain touching that happens. There's going to be some inadvertent touching. It's an intimate act in and of itself. The argument is, at some point, Deshaun Watson crossed the line. And that depending upon the evidence that was introduced on behalf of the 5 claimants, the 5 the NFL selected, is there a habit that Deshaun Watson was engaging in where he was setting up these private massages and trying, in every case, trying to make them into a sexual encounter? That's why his credibility is so important. And what he said at this hearing is so important. Did he say, I never ever went into these things trying to make them into sexual encounters? I mean, if you draw that line in the sand and the evidence otherwise suggests that, he kind of did, and common sense kind of suggests, based on everything we've seen and heard, it's going to be hard for him to say he wasn't doing this as a manifestation of some sort of habit or fetish. 66, at least, as reported by the New York Times, individuals that he retained to give him massages via social media. It's going to be very difficult to buy the idea that he wasn't getting these massages, hopeful that they would become sexual encounters, and maybe trying to make them into sexual encounters. And look, Rusty Hardin essentially admitted that. What's it been now? 4 weeks ago, when he was on radio in Houston, and he said, hey, there's nothing criminal about having a happy ending. There's nothing criminal about making someone uncomfortable, kind of conceding that's what Deshaun Watson was doing. So if he goes to this hearing and Deshaun Watson says, I did no such thing, that makes his overall testimony less believable. And that could cause the judge to say, I'm going to reject everything this guy says. He's always going to say something self-serving, the obvious self-serving thing. And for him, it's all new. He thinks all he has to do is recite talking points and it'll work. From the perspective of the person who's handling the case, who's been a federal judge for 25 years, who's practiced law for decades, she's seen every kind of liar that's out there at some point. That's the great disconnect. And that's the awakening, the rude awakening that plenty of people have once they get their first taste of the legal system. They think they just show up and say whatever and it'll work. Not that easy. You've got tells. We talk about that on PFT Live all the time. Your demeanor while you're speaking. People who are younger, people who don't have experience in the legal system, people who don't have experience communicating for a living, they aren't quite as adept at hiding the signs and the indications, and they aren't quite as skilled at answering questions in a way that is believable, that sells the idea top to bottom, all the way through, without something that would cause a very skilled listener, someone who has been lied to every which way that's possible, to say, I'm not so sure about this. And that's why Judge Robinson, her opinion is going to be so important. And we'll see what it is. I still think the week of July 25 is when we're going to find out. And in the interim, look, the civil cases keep going. It sounds like there's going to be more filed against the Texans. That doesn't go away. There's 4 left. They can still be settled, but there's 4 left. The NFL's situation is a separate analysis altogether, and it eventually, as of Monday, will be in the hands of Judge Robinson. I can't imagine her making a decision within a week. That would seem too quick. I think 2 weeks is the amount of time that she takes to write up, hopefully, a detailed and understandable ruling that will allow everyone to see what she saw and to understand why she does whatever it is she chooses to do.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.